Eventually, you'll come to a point where that won't work anymore because Google Chrome actually stores what we type in a cache. So if you don't know what that means, basically it will store this right here. And then the next time we refresh our page, it will just load this code. So if we make a new change, it won't actually load the new code because the old code is in the cache. So it's trying to save on memory. If you don't know what that means or that doesn't make any sense, that's completely fine. All you're going to want to do is if you're in Chrome, go to google.com and type in Chrome clear cache and then extension. So we're going to click this first link and we're going to click add to Chrome, add extension, and then it'll be right here. And then we're going to click automatically reload active tab after clearing data. Okay, so now if we click here, it will refresh our page. And you can tell because if I click C in there and refresh, cool. So now we're going to learn a little bit of CSS. So we're going to make a style tag. Similar to how JavaScript is in the script, CSS is in the style. So remember, HTML is the template and JavaScript is the code to use the template. But CSS is what makes it look good. So we do this by using classes and using IDs in order to link things. So for example, with this hello world p tag, we're going to say class equals p-text. Cool. So then if we go down here, we're going to say it is a class by typing a dot. So a dot is a class and a pound sign is an ID. But we're referencing a dot or a class, so we're going to type dot and then we're going to open the curly braces. So we put a dot and next we're going to put p-text and then we're going to put the curly braces and then we're going to type in color, colon, red, semicolon, and then save. Refresh our page and you'll notice the color is now red. So if we wanted to reference our text box, for example, we could say pound for ID, name, and we can set that color to be blue. And if we refresh, you'll notice that the placeholder is not blue. And that is because the placeholder is technically not the color property. There would be its own property for that. What's really neat too is if you don't actually know what you want it to look like, you can right click something and click inspect. And then you'll see all the CSS down here. And you can say, oh, would the color look good as green? And then maybe, no, color doesn't look very good as green. What about like purple? And then if you really just have no idea, because you typed in color, it will automatically give you a list of a bunch of colors that you can type in. And then you can cycle through them and it'll change the colors. So that's fine. So there's a bunch of different CSS things like there are HTML, such as there's font size. We could set it to be like 18 pixels. Up arrow keys and down arrow keys will change it. We can set font weight to be bold. There's also a bunch of other things in here. If we go back to W3 Schools and we just do /CSS, you'll notice there's a bunch of CSS stuff in here. So there's like background color. So we could go to our body and type in background color and we could make that black or any other color that we want. Font family changes the font family. And there's a bunch of other stuff. So I'm not going to get too much into CSS until we start going over individual things for the blog that we're going to be creating. But remember, you can just go to w3schools.com/CSS and you'll be able to find a bunch of different things with that. So one thing that I do want to get into with CSS though, and it's a little bit more complicated, is something called Flexbox. And that's because we're going to be going over that quite a bit. So Flexbox is what's going to allow us to move things over to be where they want to be. In order to do that, we're going to go back to our code And we're just going to find something like maybe these 3 elements. So starting a hello world. And we're going to create a div tag. And a div is basically just a container. So now we're going to remove these BRs because actually, even though I showed you how to use it, you're not supposed to use BR. You're supposed to use Flexbox and other means of CSS in order to create a new line. So we're going to put all this inside this div. We're going to set class equal to container. Now it's important to note that I'm calling this class container because I want to. It's not going to magically do anything because I call it container. I could call it container and it wouldn't make a difference. I'm just going to be referencing it as container. So then we're going to start experimenting in our console. So if I go to div class equals container, I can set this to display flex. And now it automatically puts it horizontally, but we can go to flex direction and we can do column, which will make everything happen in a column. Or we can do row, which is how it is default set. Now we can set column reverse to make it go backwards. But column is going to be fine for now. So you'll notice that everything is really big, and that's not good. So we're going to set the width of this entire div to be 50%. So that's going to make that 50% of the screen, but I don't know, everything's still too big. So instead of setting the container, what we can do instead is set the width of this input, and we can set it to maybe 20% of the screen. Or instead, we could also set it in pixels. So 20 pixels, that's a little small. We could set it 200. But typically you would want to do it percent. So we're going to do 20%. Then we can do the same thing with this button. We're going to set its width to 20%. But then I don't like how they're touching each other. So remember before we used a BR, but instead of doing that, we're going to use margin in CSS. So margin dash bottom, and we're just going to do 3%. That's a little much. Let's go down to 2. Okay, 2 works fine. So now we have positioned things around using Flexbox. We'll get into that more in the future, but I thought it was kind of important to go over for now. Another thing that's really important is remember that even though I did all these things here, if we refresh the page, they'll go away because we edited the CSS in the console, which is only the instance of this page. So if we want to actually keep these, we have to make sure that we add them into our style tag. So for here, in order to do this, I'm going to create container. I'm going to type display flex direction. I believe it was column. Okay, so now we have this replicated. Then if we go to P, that's all good. But then we need this input box to have a width of 20%. So we're going to, sorry, my cat just kicked my microphone stand. So we're going to go to name, and we're going to go to width, 20%. And then what was our, oh, and margin bottom 2%. Bottom 2%. Great. And then we want to reference our button. We can't right now because we don't have a class, so we need to give it a class. Remember, this can be whatever we want to call it. So I'm going to call it display-name-button. Very descriptive. If somebody saw that, they would know exactly what I meant by that, which is good coding practice. You want to make this as easy to read for other people as possible. So display name button, and then we're going to give that a width of 20%. And we're going to give that, actually it doesn't technically need a margin bottom because nothing's underneath of it. So let's refresh our page. And everything's the same, so it worked. So remember, we have to reference the class or the ID, and that is how CSS ties to something. So that's going to wrap it up.